Thank you all for joining us this morning. We appreciate your time. Hopefully, we can provide a little bit of value. I have Tyler Jones here as well, an attorney that does a lot of practice transitions for veterinarians in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Alaska, California. Tyler, where else are you? Are you licensed anywhere else?
Hey Steve, I can't remember what you said. I'm licensed in Alaska, Arizona, Idaho, Washington, and Oregon. So I do them kind of all over the West Coast.
Nice. Well, thanks for joining, Tyler. I appreciate it. Just to clarify, Tyler doesn't work for Omni. He has his own, he works for his own practice. Um, but we work together a lot. So we're happy to have him joining. And I'm just going to kick it off. Not a whole lot of intro. Hopefully, you guys already know who Omni is if you're on our email list. So shouldn't be a big surprise there. Um, sorry, I'm just getting used to this screen thing. It's technically in my way. That's weird. Anyways, what's wrong with that? All right, so the veterinarian world remains pretty strong. Year over year, the revenues have continued to go up just a little bit. In previous years during COVID, obviously it went way up, but lately it's been down from those previous years. However, the income and costs have continued to go up just a little bit, so revenues have continued just to increase a little bit. Pet care increases, spending increases have been up. There's still ongoing veterinarian shortages across the nation, as you guys probably already know. The continuing education is increasing quite a bit. I think the average was 200,000. I went on three different sites and saw anywhere between the average cost for education is between 160 to with all in with board room and board and food and all that stuff to 387. So it's continuing to go up. What's going on with corporate sales? They're still out there. They're happening. They're quite slow. Now we'll talk more about that in a little bit. They're preferring multi-doctor clinics and being very particular. There's a lot of solo practices for sale currently. I would even say it might be a buyer's market with a lot more sellers than there are buyers. And that's a trend across the nation. With that, still, though, banks are ready, willing, and able to finance a strong buyer. They are very aggressive. We've seen them come in with 0% financing required, and sometimes as low as 5.75, sometimes a little bit lower. There's some tricks there that I will tell buyers to help them get a better rate. But there's individual practices are here to stay. If the corporates are not tending to buy those, and individual ownership is staying strong. So keep it up, folks. Corporate buyers. So as everybody knows, there was only a couple in the 2000s, and now there's hundreds. I have anywhere between 3 and 10 folks calling me each week, seeing if we have new practices or if I have a practice in my pocket that I can tell them about. Very few of these corporates are actually pulling the trigger and doing things. As of 2023, about 25% of practices were owned by corporates. They were taking in 50% of all veterinarian revenues across the nation, which is that tells you something. At the same time, the valuations were and the prices that they were paying were sometimes even up to 25 times EBITDA. Average was less, but it was still significantly higher than it is now. Tyler If I'm making a fool of myself, you jump in. The screen thing looks weird. I should probably move my. This is really weird.
Looks
Uh,
good.
all right. Just
Don't
feel like
worry
I'm
about it.
talking to nothing here. Uh, they're currently not paying as much as they were in previous years. The average that I'm seeing right now is 8 times to 12 times EBITDA. It's a package situation. Uh, the last year, they were corporate purchases have significantly slowed down from, well, let's say 2023, 2024. They were slowing down. Some stopped, and right now, the trend that I see is that there are very few corporates actually buying anything. There's a lot that will talk to you. I'm sure that you all are getting text messages from these guys on a daily basis to have coffee or go out to lunch, learn a little bit about your practice. But are they actually going to buy your practice? I don't know right now. That they're mainly just poking around, and I think they're getting ready to maybe jump back on and have a pile of practices that they're interested. But generally, the corporate sales have been significantly slower.
Steve,
However,
can I ask you a question?
yeah, please.
Do you notice a difference in how they compute EBITDA, like from versus 5 or 6 years ago, where you guys would compute it? Do you get a sense that they really are in charge of EBITDA now? And tell me a little bit about that in terms of how they're computing it and kind of the differences more recently than in prior years.
That's a good question. Um, the large corporates don't even ask for our EBITDA these days. They don't want to see it. They form their own completely, 100%. And the smaller corporates, the one-off guys that him and their buddies are trying to buy up some practices, they will be more interested in what we've came up with. They're going to have their own CPA dig into it. But the big corporates don't look at our EBITDA. And that's been a trend for a while. It's obviously important for us to know where we're at and go from there to make sure we're getting strong offers. But that's what I'm seeing right now. Does that answer that, Tyler?
Thanks, Steve.
Yeah. Are you able to jump in on this so I can see you? So it's like we're talking to each other?
I don't know how to do that, and I'm not going to learn.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, the offers that we are seeing from corporates, there are just very few. I'll be honest. There are very few offers. But the ones we are seeing, there's cash at closing, there's equity, and there's production bonuses, similar to as we've seen before. Typically, I'm seeing 80% cash, 10% equity, 10% production bonuses is what we'd like to see. Uh, we're there to make sure that we're getting you the strongest offer we possibly can. Even though there's not a lot of offers, why would you sell if it's not a good offer? Um, so it needs to be intriguing. It needs to meet your goals, and that's why we're here to help you. Our goal is specifically the opposite of what a corporate's goal is. My goal is to get you the most money from them in the best possible terms. The corporate's goal is to get you their best terms. So that's why you would have a broker. The equity can be pretty valuable. I mean, it really depends on what the entity is or corporate is that's buying them. Tyler and I have there's no corporates on this call, so I can say it. There's some that we don't want any of their equity. It isn't worth anything. Uh, they have a couple practices. They're brand new. They're going to probably fold up any minute now if they haven't already, and they don't have a lot of cash. And so what they'll try to do is entice sellers to go with them by promoting heavy equity. And I would say Tyler probably agrees, but equity in what? What is it? There is no equity. And if these guys don't end up buying 20 practices, that equity that they claim that you had out there isn't going to be worth anything. Now, large corporates, the equity can be worth quite a bit, maybe even 3 to 5 or more times what they've offered. There's a couple corporates right now or one in particular that's planning on going to an IPO in the next year or two. So that would be very interesting to see what happens. There had been a couple recaps where they did payouts not too long ago with a few of them, and some doctors were able to uh, have some leverage there. Tyler, any comments about that?
No, I would just remind people that what equity looks like depends on a deal to deal basis. Like
Yeah.
8 or 9 years ago, the equity was usually just common units. There were less restrictions on them. Now the corporate groups have got more sophisticated with rules associated with the equity. So there are different buyback options if you quit early or if you don't finish your term. A lot of times the equity's upside is capped and it's effectively like a disguised promissory note where you only get a certain amount of cash depending on how long you hold the equity for. And so I think a lot of people after Amerivet and NVA had their kind of liquidity events just assumed that the equity would be this great investment. But as we kind of approach the year 3 and year 4 horizons on when a lot of people transacted, I have a lot of clients calling me saying, I don't really want the equity anymore. Can you help me negotiate giving some of it back? So I think a big part of any practice transition is really understanding what the equity is and talking to your broker and talking to your attorney and making sure that the equity is actually doing what you think it's going to do for your kind of retirement portfolio.
Yeah. Great point. Great point. Sometimes it's hard to put a cash value on what it's going to be in the future, wouldn't you say? Nearly impossible.
Yeah, I think what I tell people is the advice for equity depends a lot on your age and your situation, right? If you're 65 and you're retiring, you probably should treat the equity like it's worth nothing and just hope you get an upside and negotiate a deal that works for the rest of your retirement portfolio. If you're 42 and you have another 15 or 20 working years left, you can be more aggressive and hope for a bigger pop on the equity. But you can't negotiate in a vacuum, and so you have to kind of look at how it interacts with your own personal goals. Like there was a time, like 4 or 5 years, or no, just a couple years ago, there was this one group. Steve knows them. They were wandering around just telling everyone, "We'll give you a couple $100,000 for your clinic, and then just a ton of equity." And that was kind of right at the tail end of when everyone was so excited about corporate deals. And they got a couple people to do those deals. And unfortunately, I think the equity is worth nothing now. So you have to make sure that you're really doing your due diligence whenever you're talking to a buyer that's offering, frankly, anything other than cash.
Yeah. I really can say that none of my clients worked with that group.
None of mine did either.
Not everybody can say that. Um, the future looks like the larger practices are going to be continued to be purchased by corporates. They're quiet right now. They will likely get back into it and be very aggressive in the coming years. So I am assuming that there will be more and more corporates buying up more and more larger practices and less individual ownership in the future. And they're expected to generate all 70% of veterinarian revenue across the nation. So they are focusing on that, making that money. Interest rates and are going to affect private equity. There's been a lot of news in private equity right now about what's going on. It's more known now that they're being quiet, and apparently it's starting to scare some folks in the economic world. What are corporates looking for? They will, no matter who you are, they will contact you. But what they're typically actually purchasing is a 2 to 3 doctor practice with 4 exam rooms in urban locations along the I-5 or major corridor. They're looking for, uh, they do want high revenue, but they also want a normalized revenue, which means that if there was one doctor producing $4 million for some reason and another doctor producing $1 million, they view that that's a vulnerability with that one doctor who makes so much, and they're going to have to replace them with four doctors. So even though that EBITDA might be $1.5 million, the corporate is not going to view that as a great opportunity these days. They might feel that they're overpaying if they did 10 times EBITDA. They might have to hire, well, they're going to have to hire if that doctor retires, maybe four doctors to replace them. And that's going to be very, very challenging. So that is something uh, that they've been looking at right now is just normalized practices. Doesn't have to be high revenue. In fact, they prefer ones that they don't have to pay as much for. That don't have as high revenue, but that have lots of doctors. The challenge is there's just fewer and fewer of those out there, and the ones that are there, a lot of them now have no interest in selling to corporate. It doesn't matter what is thrown in front of them. There are a couple corporates that are claiming that they'll buy solo practices. And Tyler and I have both worked on these. They seem to just poke around a lot and then come up with an excuse and disappear. Uh,
What one thing you have to look at is whenever you're sorry to interrupt, Steve, is whenever
no, go for
the
it, please.
a corporate's looking at a solo practice, you wonder, are they looking at a different practice nearby and they're trying to get a sense of the competition? And so whenever a corporate's looking at a solo practice, your hackles have to go up a little bit to make sure that you're playing a healthy amount of defense and that they actually are interested in kind of tucking the solo practice into their portfolio, or there's some strategic reason they're buying it. The one exception to that is a lot of them will buy a solo practice if it's a specialist of some kind.
I think that's such a good point. Like the, the overarching thing there is that these corporates have a lot of money and they are strategizing in every way they possibly can. And if that means poking around and learning all about your company, they will do that. If they can get you to go out for a cup of coffee, they will do that. If they can get your financials, they will do that. They might not actually have the intentions of buying your practice. They might just want to learn about it. And do not put anything aside from what they might be willing to do um, to learn about that market. All right. I'm going to keep rolling. So there's a general lack of veterinarians. I think we all know that. Yeah, they're trying to open up more schools. They're having their own challenges, but there's a general lack of veterinarians across the board. Non-corporate buyers. The thing that I have seen that makes a practice sellable is its location. Um, if there needs to be a willing and able veterinarian in that area that wants to live in that area or be willing to drive to that area to get this practice sold. That has been a huge factor. The location has been a huge factor. So having somebody in the market that wants to come into that market has been a key factor in a lot of the individual practice sales lately for me. The value of the practice, they've I've seen it range between 100% of production, which is pretty rare, to 60% of production. It does slightly be impacted by the interest rates. The other thing that impacts it is the buyer's ability. So if a seller has one ability and they're producing about $1.3 million, that's awesome. And the practice might be worth 1.3 million. However, it does depend on that buyer's ability. And their ability is something in the history of $4,000 a year at their associate position. That bank may not be able to give them what that practice is actually worth. So even though we find the right buyer looking for the right location, it might not mean that the bank can give 100% of that production. In that case where they're doing 400,000, the bank will probably be closer to the 60% of production. And if anybody has any questions, I would really value if you ask them at any time through the chat. There's a chat.
I'll be looking to see if anyone asks, so I'll make sure they get to you, Steve.
Okay, thank you. Oh, now I can see you, Tyler. Oh, thank goodness. I could just see myself for the longest time, and it was really bothering me.
Hey, buddy.
My bud. But now I can't see the PowerPoint. Uh, oops. Uh, yeah, there's the ratio of the veterinarian world between male and female is changing. A lot of older guys are retiring, and a lot of younger gals are getting into practice ownership. It's pretty awesome. Uh, I have had this a few times, and Tyler has had it a few times too. I'm representing somebody right now that's they sold their practice to a corporate, and now they're looking to do a startup. Believe it or not, well, I couldn't get them to. It was location driven. They really wanted a specific location and could not find a practice in that area, and so they're probably going to do a startup. There's individuals small that are two or three doctors that are buying up clinics here and there. Um, they're getting funding. They're moving on things and buying practices. They've been kind of quiet right now, just with all the economic situations. But I think that we'll see more and more of those hopefully in the future. Those are just individual DVMs that have maybe teamed up with one or two people to buy practices that are getting bank financing. Um, and then there's, yeah, individual buyers. I'm going to talk more about those. A lot of them, in general, are a little bit younger, somewhere between 45 and 35. There's a bit of a trend there where um, some of them are absolutely gung ho, and you send them a practice, and they go look at it the next day, and they'll put in an offer. There's others that are extremely, extremely hesitant and will dissect it and pick everything apart that they possibly can, and they're probably not going to buy the practice. But they're out there, and there's a lot of those guys that are kicking around right now, and we're aware of them, and we'd love to see them buy a practice, but they're just dissecting them too much and a little bit too hesitant to commit, to say the least. Most of these folks are looking for a modern, clean facility. It doesn't need to be built last year, but it needs to be updated and relatively clean. If the practice isn't clean, if it's old and dusty and smells, these individuals are probably going to pass. Um, Most of them understand that the technology in the practice is going to be older, but uh, they're going to probably get some extra financing from the bank to update technology. So as a seller, be prepared for that. If you're all paper files, be prepared that the individual that comes in there is going to be, we want it to be digital, and they're going to work towards that. A lot of these folks are the big difference these days is that individual DVMs are not as interested in working there in the clinic for 5 days a week. And you can't really blame folks. Uh, they are looking to do 3 days, 4 days a week. 30-hour weekdays is what a lot of folks are looking at. And that's why a lot of them are actually going over to corporates, because corporates can give them that work-life balance um, that they want to have. So a lot of the individuals will talk about hiring an associate as soon as possible to so that they have less time, a little less time, a little bit more work-life balance. Most of these folks are less clinically prepared, a lot less surgeries underneath their belts. They have very little business ownership abilities. For that aspect, we can team them up with CPAs and uh, consultants and all types of folks to help them with that part, but they're just going to have to get their own clinical time in. Uh, Once they see your schedule and they realize that you haven't taken a day off in the last 3 years, that's going to be a challenge for individuals. So when you're meeting with them, emphasizing that you do take off a week to go to Montana and go hiking with your family or whatever is good for them to hear. And again, individuals, It's been location, location, location. So when we're talking about getting ready, I'm going to wrap up pretty soon here, but what you can do when we're thinking about getting ready to sell your practice, whether it's tomorrow or in 5 years, plan ahead. So let's get the valuation, and the valuation might not be the market value, but we can use that to determine any opportunities to increase or improve the practice at this stage. It's a great tool for early stages. It's not the deciding factor on the price, but it is a great opportunity to really dig into the practice and the financials. Um, if you're in a rural area, be prepared 2, 3 years. I know, I'm sorry. Urban area, maybe a year and a half, sometimes more. Two doctor practices or more, we should expect that could be anywhere between 3 months and uh, 18 months. During the evaluation, we're going to look at the staffing, the fees, the services. There's one thing you can do always when you're getting ready to prepare your clinic is just to clean it up a little bit. I can't say how. I was in a clinic yesterday and there were sticky notes on the ceiling, and there was dust everywhere. And the panels from the ceiling, a bunch of them had the watermarks. Back in the day, you go to Home Depot and buy those for about 75 cents a panel for your ceiling. So if you have a watermark up there, even if it's $3 now for a new panel, why don't you go ahead and get that taken care of? Get the valuation. We're going to look at the price for the practice, the real estate, um, look at general benchmark performances, see if there's any opportunities to make some small changes to improve your value over time. Sometimes there's big opportunities. If we're looking at selling to a corporate, we can really pinpoint some opportunities through the valuation. What's included in that? We're going to look at the EBITDA, the investment aspect of it. That's when you're selling to corporates, that's a big factor. Individuals, we're looking at the debt to service, cash flow. The cash flow is going to mean everything to the bank. And you would think it means everything to the individual buyers, but they don't quite get it. Cash flow means at the end of the day, what is the doctor paying themselves and what are they bringing home? And what that tells the bank is, can they pay themselves a living wage and can they pay the loan amount? And if they can do that, the bank will typically give them the money that their production will support based on a practice. So the cash flow is a huge indicator of the practice's value. I will look at the real estate valuation, whether it's lease or a building for sale. It's really important to make sure that if we're going to sell the building, we need to be looking at the condition of the building. If you're going to lease the building back, we really need to focus on that rent that we're going to be asking. It needs to be reasonable enough for the buyer to be able to actually pay it, but it also needs to be reasonable enough that you can sell the building for the market value. And getting those things linked up is it's a bit of work. It's 9:30. I'd like Tyler to jump in. He's got a lot of good stuff to say. Folks can take a picture of some of these benchmarks if they'd like. Yeah, 3 seconds on it. These are the ideal conditions. It's not always the case. Big thing here is revenue. Total overhead, less than 65% would be great. Get your accounts receivable dialed in. Nobody really wants them. They're not worth much. If you're looking to sell your practice and you want to make it more valuable, get an associate. That makes my world and your world significantly easier. Plan ahead, give yourself 3 years. Let's start talking early. I'm going to need 3 years worth of reports to to go through the value of it. So be prepared with your documents if you can, having your CPA and your bookkeeper available. If you have a lease, we need to work on your options to renew as soon as possible. If you lease your space and there's no lease left, then your practice isn't worth much at all. Whether you're trying to sell it to a corporate or to an individual, we have to establish a long-term ability in that space. So a 5-year lease with at least a couple 5-year options to renew is critical. If there's a teardown clause in there and you have $1 million practice, that's going to be really difficult to sell to a buyer.
I would
So
just jump in and
yeah,
echo that. I That's like a recurring fact that I see a lot of times with my sellers is they kind of come to the table thinking they're in a place of power and flexibility because they're month to month or they only have a year left and they sort of think that the landlord will be more inclined to negotiate with the buyer. And the reality of it is it really puts your whole practice sale in jeopardy. So if you're on the tail end of your lease, that probably is the number one deal killer. So I would encourage anyone to kind of go grab their lease and see where they're at with it and make sure that it's more or less camera ready for a transition.
yeah. The leases can be one of the biggest deal killers, like Tyler said. And what's the likelihood if you're personally guaranteeing your lease, what's the likelihood that the landlord is going to let you off of the lease so that you can move on when a buyer comes? Uh, they may not let you off the personal guarantee, which means that if the buyer was to fail, that the landlord could come back to you for financial or legal repercussions. That's a huge challenge, and we're going to try to work on it, but be prepared that that could be something that comes up. We see it all the time. And the term of the lease, like Tyler said, that having being on a month to month is great for you if you're planning on retiring and closing up your doors at any given moment. But if you're looking to sell your practice, there is no leverage there whatsoever. Um, if you own your building, are you going to be the landlord or are you planning on selling that thing? Um, Regardless, if you have an old oil tank or some if there's a pipe sticking out of the ground, you don't know what it is, get an environmental study done on it prior to especially selling the building. Because if a buyer comes through there and gets an environmental study and they determine that there's a oil tank, that's going to be a big red flag for the bank, and they're going to make you take care of it prior to the sale. We've seen environmental costs range from $300 for the site test to I had a client in Shoreline that it turned out that there was an old gas station underneath their office building off of 99, and they spent about $300,000 to get that thing out of the ground and uh, deal with it, which was not fun. Check your loans. So if you have loans for equipment or any loans with the bank, let's look at is there any prepayment penalties? When you look at that, if you're leasing items from an equipment rep, are they just going to let you out of that lease? No, they have you on the hook and they're expecting $50,000 over the course of the next 3 years. And if you sell your practice, they're going to want to recoup some of that money. So try not to sign any long-term leases with equipment or supply or some of the digital companies that are out there. That can cost you a lot of money if you have to break a lease agreement. Tyler, any thoughts on that?
I agree. I always say that no matter how obvious the business arrangement may be for you as an owner, for the modern buyer fresh out of vet school, they're so risk adverse that you know they approach everything from a how is this going to negatively impact me? And so even though you may say, of course you should sign up for this website hosting, it's such a good deal, you should take the contract over when you buy it from me. They don't think of that way. They've been on the wrong end of a lot of contracts already in their career if they've worked for corporates. And so they're just incredibly risk adverse. So even if it means you paying an extra couple $100s a year to not have the long-term agreements, it's usually to your benefit if you're looking to transition the clinic.
Yeah, absolutely. I just had a client in a growing area and had a relationship with Antec for the last 30 years, and they were friends, and they would go out to lunch and stuff. The rep, and when she went to sell her practice, Antec sent her a $45,000 bill, and she freaked out, called them, uh, had a good scream, and for some reason they dropped it down to $2,000, and she felt like she had the win there. But I'm just saying that that is a factor. So plan ahead. Try to minimize those leases if you can. They're not just going to let you out of them. Uh, my big, no matter what you're looking at doing, planning ahead now, talking to us, talking to your attorney, talking to your CPAs, talking to your broker, uh, is critical. Us knowing your timeline, we can help you with whatever strategic thing that we can at that moment. Maybe it's your lease. Uh, Maybe it's the financials. Maybe it's getting ready to put it on the market or whatever. But planning ahead is the big critical thing there. Tyler, sorry I took a little bit more time than I thought I would, but it's all yours, man.
Okay, sounds good. I will share my screen. Uh, all right. Can you see my PowerPoint?
Double click to enter into full screen. I can
Uh,
now. Yeah.
okay. All right, everyone. Well, I'll kind of take over from Steve. A little bit about me is I'm an attorney here in the greater Seattle area, though I practice law pretty much all over the country. I am licensed in a number of states, but my primary focus is here in the Pacific Northwest, and I'll do transactions all over the country and just affiliate with local counsel just because I do so many vet groups. Um, I went and added it up for this presentation, and over the last 10 years, I've assisted on over 100 vet transitions and partnerships, and that includes representing buyers and sellers. So I always say it's nice having that experience on both sides because you can always sort of anticipate what the other side is going to be worried about. My practice is largely focused on veterinarians just because I really enjoy working with them. They're one of the last healthcare providers that really hang their own shingle. Most of human medicine is now affiliated with a hospital. And so working with veterinarians is great because you get to work with kind and thoughtful people who are also business owners. So, uh, in our veterinary practice group, which I'm in charge of, we work on employment agreements, real estate and lease matters, buying and selling clinics, partnerships for veterinarians, any unfortunate Department of Health or licensing issues. And the last few years, it's been a lot of kind of navigating the corporate practice of vet medicine rules. One thing that we've been incredibly thoughtful of in our group is even though I get asked with some frequency to represent corporates in terms of buying their clinics for them, I've maintained that I really want to stay private and represent just private practice owners, even if it's selling to them or privately. So there's no conflict of interest there. Most all my clients have or and will continue to be small business owners. So the way I was going to approach this is kind of talk about some common legal issues that associate DVMs face and talk a little bit about that, and then talk about some issues that current owners face, and we'll tie it all together in the end and kind of see what practice transitions look like from a legal perspective. Um, One thing I always want to say, and I'll jump back to this slide, is I'm always kind of blown away. It's a testament to how hardworking and kind most vets are. A lot of times, I'm the first attorney a client's ever hired. And so, one thing I tell everyone at these presentations is no matter what happens, whether you hire me or you hire someone else or not, be really thoughtful about your engagement with the attorney. There's a entire predatory industry that you see at the Las Vegas show and the Orlando show and the Reno show of attorneys who want to charge 30 or $40,000 for these transitions because they know the vets don't know better. And so when you go and you talk to the attorneys, make sure in your engagement letter, which is the contract you sign with them, it either has their hourly rate and kind of an estimate on what they're going to charge you and kind of an obligation that they're going to check in with you if you're going to charge more, or if they're going to charge more. And then if it's a flat rate, you are more than empowered to ask for a flat rate. It is not rude. And so most attorneys will take that into account. So beware kind of the attorneys who don't do a lot of this or just say that veterinary attorneys or they do a lot of business transactions because, probably 5 or 6 times a year I get brought in at sort of the 11th hour to help finish up a deal, either from the broker. I work with brokers all over the country, or from the seller, or sometimes the corporates will just recommend me and say, Tyler, we're asking them to hire you because their attorney is not getting this done. And nothing makes me sadder than seeing these huge bills. Steve's, what's the biggest bill you've ever seen on one of these?
Well, I saw a corporate's attorney charge the corporate, I think it was 270, something like that, or I
Yeah,
think it was
it's just not.
$270,000.
Yeah, and it's just not necessary. And so beware of that because unfortunately, as anytime large amounts of money are transacting, there's sort of a predatory industry of people who come in. And the reality of it is most private practice transitions can get buttoned up for somewhere between $5,000 and $8,000, not $200,000. And most corporate ones are a little bit more complicated, but they're nowhere near those numbers. So I always just tell people, even if I'm not the attorney you want to hire someone local, give me a call and I'll give you some names of some people that you can trust. Because unfortunately, the last 5 or 6 years, it's gotten a little crazy with people who just say they do vet deals, but they actually don't know what they're doing.
Uh, Let me, yeah, I have attorneys and CPAs call me all the time trying to get into the business. They said that they've done one deal and they like to do more of them. And I hear from these guys all the time. And if you don't work with an attorney that does these, they're not going to focus on the points that are important for you specifically. If you work with a random attorney, they're not going to know what to look out for. Tyler does these all day. The worst
Yeah.
attorneys I've seen is your buddy, your buddy, your brother, or your cousin, or your friend that's your neighbor. I've seen those guys charge their clients more money than would that they should ever expect, and they do not focus on the right stuff at all. And good luck for having me try to tell some attorney what to look out for on the purchase agreement. Sorry, Tyler.
Yeah. Oh, no, you're good. I'll jump back in and I'm sure there's some associates in the audience, and if there's not, there's certainly some people who wish they understood what associates were thinking a little bit better. And so I'll start with this slide. And so these are the common legal issues that I sort of approach with associate DVMs. Um, the first one is the most common. They approach me right out of vet school and they say, Hey, I got my first employment agreement. It's got all these crazy non-compete terms and these restrictive covenants on it. Explain these to me. So the first thing I would say is that in Washington and Oregon, these are incredibly frowned upon. In fact, so frowned upon that beginning in June 2027, almost all non-competes are going to be unenforceable. The new law was passed a couple months ago. So really, these are on life support and not around for much longer. Most of my private practice owners are no longer requesting them and instead focusing more on non-solicit, so limiting someone's ability to take employees and occasionally referral sources if it's a specialty clinic. But this is the one where historically the corporates have predated on associates. They go to Wazoo or OSU. The room is named after Western Vet or whatever it's called, and they have associates signing 25 and 50-mile non-competes, and those days are probably over. And so it is ripe on their mind, these non-compete terms. Unfortunately, they just don't view it as them having enough bargaining power to negotiate out of them. Um, the other common legal issues DVMs face is they often negotiate from a place of famine. They don't think that they have any negotiation power. And the reality of it is it is out in the wild now that working for corporates is much harder on you than working for a private practice, and that you won't learn as much and that you won't be as professionally fulfilled. And so that in my mind, is a big reason why the corporate growth, like Steve has talked about, has stagnated so much the last few years is, for 8 or 9 years, the corporates were buying clinics with people in their 60s as the owners, and as those owners' employment agreements terminated and sunsetted, they were left with a need to hire, and there simply was not enough people willing to work at those clinics, so they all had to sort of go in hibernation and figure out how to hire and attract associates. And I always tell for the owner docs in the room, a lot of them call and say, I need an associate, but there's no one wants me to hire them. And a lot of that can be covered by simple things that a corporate would never do, right? So put in the agreement that you'll take the associate out for lunch once a quarter and talk to them about their practice and what they're doing and what they're struggling with. A corporate will never do that, and it's a huge thing to an associate. Um, but a lot of times they approach me with these agreements and they're feeling this great weight to sign them because of a ten or a $20,000 uh, signing bonus. And my advice often is don't sign it. It's not worth it. In 5 years, you will not care about that $10,000 signing bonus. I know it's a lot of money now, but you can negotiate them, and we do the best we can. Um, Other common legal issues is a lot of associates they get really tore up thinking about startups versus acquiring a practice. They For the last 3 or 4 years, it's been largely a seller's market, so there has not been a ton of practices for sale. As Steve would tell you now, it's probably pivoting for the first time in our careers to being more of a buyer's market. And so I'm seeing more and more people acquiring practices as opposed to doing startups. I think that's largely driven by the attractiveness of the I-5 corridor in Portland and Seattle and those areas. There's not a ton of cost-effective clinical real estate available, and so they're looking to acquire clinics. To my mind, this has never come at a better time. A lot of the multi-practice doctors have sold to corporates or are still considering that. So if you're a solo and you have a clinic you want to sell, there is more buyers than I've ever seen looking for just a great 1 or 1.5 doctor office. Another common legal issue that we talk about with associates when I meet with them is understanding what partnership means. A lot of people like the idea of a partnership, a mentor that's on deck working with them. They view it as some sort of risk arbitrage that they don't own all the clinics. Um, uh, and so they view it as just I'm safer if I only buy half. Sellers often view it as a safety net to sell half. That can be true. The problem with partnerships is the clinic usually has to be really large to support two doctors and the loan. And then the second part is everyone's really has to plan for what the second buyout looks like. And so although they can be really great opportunities if everyone gets along, they require a lot more planning. So we work through those issues, and then like I already sort of talked about, the most common legal issue we get is my associate DVMs calling me and they're just saying, I'm burned out. I shouldn't have taken the $10,000. This is awful. I work 5 days a week and I'm half full. They have me going from Squim to Olympia to Tacoma on different days, and I'm just burned out. And so, the one thing I've always found is that especially for the associate DVMs, is if they could just sit down and learn and once they learn more about the legal side of their contracts and what they're signing and sort of the economics of a vet clinic and how these transactions work, a lot of them become more empowered to make better decisions for themselves. So that's a big part of what Steve and I believe in and try and advocate. So I'll give you one kind of fact pattern. This is a really common one that I get. Steve, feel free to chime in on this. Is let's say Dr. Adam is 32 years old, so he's been practicing for 3 or 4 years. He's currently employed at Haven Veterinary, which is a corporate. He's doing fine, but he's not fulfilled. He really just wants to be a surgeon and do ACL surgeries, let's say, on dogs, and doesn't want to do spays and neuters and sea turtles, but they are sort of making him. Uh, he plans to leave within a year. He wants to partner with a DVM he worked at prior to vet school. He was an intern there, and that person reached out to him. The practice is doing $800,000. The owner is 65. Again, Adam's 32, and the owner owns the real estate. So I'll kind of walk through what those conversations that I would have, and I'd welcome Steve to chime in is with his thoughts. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to look at his agreement with Haven Veterinary, and we're going to make sure that he doesn't have any kind of predatory termination clause in it. That was a big theme probably 4 or 5 years ago. It's definitely trickling down, but does he have to give 6 months notice? Does he have to give 90 days notice? Can he only give notice in a certain amount of time? So we're really looking at that to make sure that he's compliant with that so that he can walk away from that corporate practice and feel really good that, there's going to be no strings attached, including non-competes and non-solicits. And then we're going to have a conversation about the partnership model. What does that really look like on a clinic doing $800,000? Steve, would you think that that's a good opportunity for a partnership? It might be the case that it doesn't make enough money to support a partnership, right, Steve?
Yeah, it really depends on what that net income is at the end of the day. Uh,
Right,
yeah, so we have to look at that revenue, cash flow.
right. And so we may have to do kind of a unique partnership model where, you know, Adam and the owner take a percentage of their production and then they split profits. It may be the case that one doctor just wants a salary and the other one wants, to take on admin. So we're really, if partnership is really what they want to do, where they want to own it together, you have to be really thoughtful, depending on the size of the clinic, to make it make sense for both parties. Another third rail on this is always lending. They're going to be want to see in the partnership agreement a pathway to Adam having enough money to service the loan for the buy-in. A lot of times, people will say partnership, but really what they're talking about is just buying the current owner out and having a really thorough work back agreement where the seller works back, maybe makes a little bit of admin money for the first couple months while he teaches Adam how to run the clinic. And a really strong work back agreement can oftentimes achieve almost the exact same goals as the partnership, but be less complicated. Again, a lot of times sellers say they want a partnership agreement because they view it as the safer option. It's safe, but it's only safe if you negotiate it where you can get bought out for the rest, right? I have a ton of partners who are now in their late 60s or 70s who are saying, I want my other partner to buy me out. Unfortunately, I wasn't involved in the partnership negotiations, and they have no legal right to make them do that. And so owning half of something is usually worse than owning all of it. And so you really want to structure the transaction where you have that transition and that full retirement spelled out. The last part is there was the fact in there that the seller owns the real estate. You can't view these things in isolation because the real estate is often intimately tied with the practice and its health. And so you want to make sure that when you're doing these, you're updating the lease, making sure that there's opportunities to transition the real estate. So often, the biggest mistake I see sellers make is they overvalue their real estate, not in terms of a dollar amount, but they overvalue it in terms of what it means to their portfolio. And so they just assume that, well, I don't want to sell it. I don't want to write a first refusal on the lease. I don't want to give an option. And then what happens is it's 5 or 6 or 7 years down the road, and the owner of the clinic's now busy, doesn't really want to buy it anymore, is too frazzled and stressed out to think about that. And really, although it's generating some monthly cash flow, if that clinic ever sold or closed down or anything happened, it would go to zero. And I'll tell Steve may disagree, but the shell clinics where a clinic used to be there, they do not transact on the market well. They sit for a long time. It's hard to transition vet clinics into other spaces because they have such high load factors. There's so many walls just because of how they're structured. They don't turn into a dental office or anything like that with any kind of ease. And so the saddest things I see are people when we're negotiating who are just adamant that the buyer will never get their hands on the real estate and they think they're being protective of their portfolio. And then, 5 or 6 years later, the buyer's moved and the clinic's empty. And now this asset that was worth maybe $1 million, really they're trying to sell it now for 200 or 300 grand. Um,
Yeah.
Do you know,
I have
do
seen
you-
that, and also, I mean, the thing I would add to that is really location based as well. So if you're on the I-5 corridor, you might be able to sell it uh, easily uh, if somebody was to move out. But if you're outside of that, it can be very challenging to sell the building with no tenant in it. So something to consider. Yeah. Thanks, Tyler.
Yeah, the thing I would always leave people with is when I know this is supposed to be the associate side of the fact pattern, but when I'm talking to sellers if you were selling your house and you had a camera during the open house where you could look at everyone walking around, it would be of great value for you to know which person walking around the open house likes your clinic, your home the most. When you're selling your healthcare real estate, you do know who wants the real estate the most. It's the buyer. And so I always tell people that it's usually advisable to start spelling out the pathway to the real estate transition, especially for vet clinics, and definitely depending on the area as early as possible, because it is such a big part of the retirement portfolio.
I see a lot of buyers that do really value owning the real estate. And right now, a lot of the banks will give nearly 100% of financing for a real estate purchase that involves a practice. So it's never been an easier time to own the building for a buyer, financing wise. So it's a lot of opportunity for them. But a lot of them will say, if I can't own the building, I don't want to look at that practice. I have great practices all over that have leases, and the buyers are not touching them because of the lease specifically.
Yeah, I agree with that. And a lot of times my sellers call me and they a year later and they go, I wish I would have sold it. I don't really care for being a landlord. I'm tired of every time it snows having to figure out who's going to plow the parking lot. And, so uh, it's always worth a conversation at least.
Yeah, and if you're going to lease it, then we need to make sure that the rent equals the property market value. So if you do decide to sell it, that we can sell it for what it's worth. Because when you're selling an investment property, the only thing that investors look at is what is the income from that property if there's a long-term lease. So it's critical to set up a good lease and understand the cap rate in that local market.
I agree with that. And kind of the next thing I was going to talk about is the common legal issues that I talk to when I'm talking to my current practice owner. So, I'm at the kind of a fun part of my career where I did their startups, 2 or 3 years into my practice, they're now thinking about selling, they want to move, they're collecting dogs and kids, and so they want to open a second location. So, having lots of different conversations is great. Common thing I hear is, Tyler, I need to hire an associate. I need to start thinking about my transition, maybe bring on a partner, but there's no good DVMs. And, I would disagree with that. As of right now, most associate DVMs working in corporates are looking for a way out. I very rarely meet an associate DVM at a corporate group who is saying, I want to be here forever. It's a place where they go for 3 or 4 years, but most of them do want to leave. And so a lot of times it becomes sort of like I was talking about, sneaking in some incentives into their employment agreements that don't really hurt the seller economically, but give the corp or give the associate an incentive um, to jump ship and to come over. I would say that although they may not be looking necessarily because they're so busy and a lot of them do only want to work 3 or 3.5 days a week, there is probably more people looking to leave corporates than I've ever seen in my life. Every associate group meeting I attend or study club, most of them are thinking about leaving. Some other common concerns are the rise of specialists. I won't talk too much about that,
Tyler, what
but
are some of the things you could dangle in front of an associate to get them maybe to bite? What's
you
something that's
know,
enticing?
it's sort of a generational thing, but if I'm talking to an older doctor who's ran their own clinics, it seems completely fair to them, and I don't disagree, that the associate should make X percentage of their production. Unfortunately, a lot of the associates have come up in a world where they got a guaranteed minimum salary, so that, Haven Veterinary would pay them a base of 120,000 and then they would get anything extra to the extent, 20% of their production was bigger. I encourage my clients to, it's not that the salary has to be huge to put you at risk. They just want a safety net. And so reach a little bit for that salary, even though you didn't have one when you were an associate. And it would blow your mind how many people are willing to jump just for the psychological comfort of knowing if there's a bad month, they have a base salary. Um, the other thing I would say is, negative accruals are largely done with. Most of the corporates are not even doing those. So getting rid of those is a big thing that really attracts associate doctors. And then the final piece is just a lot of intangibles that really mean a lot to younger doctors. So telling them that they only have to work 2 weekends a month, agreeing to meet with them quarterly to sort of discuss practice logistics and things like that. If you have a young doctor who does a procedure that you don't do and that would add a lot of value or that would be accretive to your practice, agree to give them 21 or 22% of their production for that procedure. It's all upside to you. You don't know how to do dog acupuncture or, you don't have the physical therapy water tank that the associate said they'll bring in. And so give them a little bit extra to make it easy for them to jump ship. And a lot of times I see those relationships as incredibly fruitful. The one bit of advice I give to all my owners is a lot of times they go, well, I really don't want to pay a base salary. I don't want to have any guaranteed minimum. I didn't. And that's just a change that's happening in the industry and it's happening for lawyers too. Uh, I always just say, hire slow and fire fast, right? Just because you hire an associate doesn't mean they have to work for you forever. And so you're better off growing your clinic, getting yourself in a situation where you can take time off, than, at the end of the day, a lot of times I see clients and they go, why didn't the associate sign the agreement? And it's as simple as, not agreeing to cover $2,000 a year of CE expenses for them. So the thing I always say is my private practice owners think that the associate DVMs are not signing with them for tens of thousands of dollars of reasons. And what I would suggest is oftentimes they're not signing for a couple $1,000s of reasons. Let's see here. Talked a lot about the associates. Common legal issues for owners. We talked some about this is understanding the limits of the partnership model. Clinics really do have to be pretty substantial to justify a partnership where each owner can take enough money home to feed their family and split the profits. Additionally, there's a temptation amongst some of the vet CPAs to just split everything 50-50. A lot of times, production-based partnership models where people take a percentage of their own production and then split the profits are more attractive, especially to sellers who just want to kind of offload some of the admin and get back to clinical medicine. But really structuring those and making sure that there is a pathway to selling the second half of the partnership, that there's a pathway to adding a third partner and divesting the interest, because there's nothing worse than selling half and being stuck with half. And so that's really what we're looking for when we're negotiating partnership agreements. Um, Another thing is corporate versus private sales. Everyone sort of treats them as the same, but as Steve will tell you, they're two completely different animals. And so a lot of times people are really torn on what to do. And then when you sort of describe the corporate sale process versus the private sale process, it makes the decision a little easier for them. And then real estate limitations and constraints, we talked about that, making sure that your lease is attractive to a potential purchaser, that you have some sort of runway to 5 or 10 years, that you're negotiating the release of your personal guarantee now, maybe 5 or 10 years before you even want to sell, so that when you do go to sell, the landlord can't leverage that against you. Um, and that you're really structuring your practice so that this huge part of it can transition smoothly when it does uh, make time for the when it does come for the sale. Uh, let's see here. So here's another kind of fact factor. Dr. Sarah, she's 55. She owns her practice, but she's tired of rolling over every morning and checking her cell phone to see who's going to call in sick that day. She has two very part-time associates. And she works full time, and full time means 5.5 days, and she's the one that's on call. Her clinic revenue is 1.2 million. She really doesn't want to sell the clinic. She finally has it at a place where she really likes it. and her work-life balance. Her kids are off at college, so she has a little bit more time to spend at the clinic. She's considering an associate for partner track or selling the clinic. She's not really sure. And she owns the real estate, and the real estate has a substantial value compared to the clinic. It's worth a couple $1 million, where the clinic is worth, whatever Steve says it's worth. Um, so this is kind of the things we think about, the benefits and risks of partnership. You could bring an associate on right now, and that may make sense, but you're really not going to know if you want to be partners with them for a couple years. And oftentimes that can be a tough situation because they bought half the clinic and then you're asking them to get another loan to buy out the rest. Oftentimes the second loan does not cash flow as well as the first loan, especially depending on how your operating agreement is structured. She's 55, so the buy-in starts when she's 57. They live like that for a few years. Then it's another, tranche sold in the early 60s. That's a lot of risk for kind of a compressed period of time. So we sort of balance that risk against, well, what would selling it all now, paying the taxes, and then just working back with the money in a brokerage account, kind of modeling that out and seeing if that yields a different result because you sort of divested yourself of the interest, but you've also divested yourself of some risk in the event that the partner does not buy you out on your desired timeline. And that, as is often the case, a lot of times partnerships, when they work well, they're amazing and they're beautiful. I love all my law partners, but when they work poorly, it's worse than a divorce. And so there's always risk with partnership. And having those conversations and making sure that the operating agreement is really clear is important. Um, the outright sale, that may make some sense in terms of divesting your interest and kind of getting out. The risk is that Dr. Sarah goes from signing the front of the paychecks to the back and doesn't really like it. My experience with DVMs is that they actually love it. They love just coming in, doing their clinical work, maybe mentoring some LVTs or some young doctors and leaving. And so, sort of looking at what the difference is between 21 or 22% of production and or salary, what they would need to make a work back work can make a lot of sense. Steve and I had a transaction a couple years ago where one of the sellers had the most granular details. I take a lunch from 11:30 to 1. I only work these days. I don't want to work weekends. On these procedures, I get 22%. On these, I get 21. I get 5% of prescription refills. I get 2.5 if there's no exam. And so, all those things, the more detail you can provide, as granular and as annoying as it may seem at the time, really spell out the relationship and can make a work back feel a lot more like a partnership. Um, and she's talking about selling. So Steve's having conversations with her about what a corporate versus a private sale would look like. Does she want to work back for at a minimum 3 years, more likely five, making the lowest percentage? That's most of the time what the corporates pay, 20%. Does Steve disagree with the EBITDA calculation? Now, I kind of fed the question during his, but 8 or 9 years ago, it was a conversation. The brokers or the sell side would prepare an EBITDA calculation, and the buyers would poke at it, ask questions, but they would work together. Now they just give you an EBITDA number, and you may disagree, and frankly, you may not even know how they calculated it. Um, the corporate sales are an earnout. So usually there's a production-based goal. So even though it may sell for 6 to 10x, a couple of those X's are tied to an earnout, so a growth goal that the goal is when you're negotiating them that they're not aspirational, that they're very achievable. And you don't want them achievable like a common fact pattern I get with corporate deals is they'll say, well, we're going to give you this money if you achieve this goal, which you'll achieve because we're going to get you an associate. You don't know that the corporate group's going to be able to get them an associate. And a lot of times they're negotiating the goal in very tight windows. You have from year one to year two, you must hit this revenue goal with an associate that has worked there for 9 months, and they're sort of baking in you getting an associate to stay as also part of the revenue goal. So increasingly, I see earnouts as more specious than ever. They used to just be if you hit this goal, you get this money. And now there's always this sort of nested, you help us find and retain talent component to it, which can be difficult depending on your location, right? If you're in the middle of Idaho or eastern Oregon, it can be harder to find an associate. So you may not even have an associate there by the time your earnout window starts, and you lost the money already. We talked a little bit about the equity, and if you're 68, you may prefer more cash up front than equity, and so negotiating those things. That's not to dump on corporates. I think that I've seen corporate transactions change my clients' lives in terms of economically, and they've really enjoyed it. It's just that not all corporates are created equal. And so a lot of people opt for the private sale method. So you might talk to Sarah and she goes, I just don't want all that stress in my life. I just want to wake up on a Friday morning with some money in my bank account and I'll work back. And those transactions are a lot simpler, cleaner. You sort of know who you're selling to. And so that makes a lot of sense. Real estate, with sort of the last part of the conversation we'd have is in a corporate transaction, real estate is a liability for the most part. They're going to give you the most bottom fair market value rent that they can achieve. There'll be nominal annual escalations in it, and they're going to want long term. So 5 years with 4 5-year options to extend. And so unless you can sell that real estate to a real estate investment group like a REIT, or there are some groups out there who go around finding vet clinic real estate to sell, you're going to be a landlord for a long time, and potentially your kids will be a landlord when they inherit the building or your spouse. And so that's fine. And it's really important in those situations, especially if you're at all entertaining it, to work with Steve so that he can make sure that the lease is structured in a way where it would be attractive to a third party buyer. In Sarah's case, it's such a large part of her portfolio, she may not want to chance it. And so she's going to opt for the private sale just to make sure that she has a clean pathway to transitioning her real estate. And Steve probably has those conversations more than I do, but this is just to kind of give you a sense on, what we're balancing when we're negotiating these transactions together. Does that sound right, Steve?
Yeah, one thing I want to say about private sales, and I got this question in the chat, I think when I was talking and just seeing it, but think about the individual that's determined, driven, and is willing to buy a practice right now. They are pretty strong-headed. They're able to overcome a lot of stuff. And if you've been practicing in your clinic for the last 30 years and you sell your clinic and you think you're going to want to work back for this 37-year-old doctor for the next 2 years, I want you to think about how quickly you might be butting heads with that individual. Um, the typical work back for a seller with an individual, 2 weeks is good. Get them trained up on their stuff. Uh, Let them learn how to log on to the computers and all that stuff. 2 months is pushing about too much. That's up to you guys.
I've
Uh,
never had a buyer say, I wish the seller would have stayed, and I've never had a seller say, I wish I could have stayed longer.
Absolutely never. Absolutely never. You will butt heads. And if you're going to work for an individual, if you're working for a corporate, that's different. They have their systems in place. They're going to let you be a little bit more autonomous. They're going to be used to that, the setup. An individual, you need to be prepared that if you're selling to one of them, you're going to have to keep your mouth shut. You're no longer the owner. And how does that feel? So I recommend the longest work pack is about uh, 2 months, honestly. Uh, you it's just too much there. You owned that for 30 years and now they do, and you're gonna have too much to say. We do it every once in a while, but it just the seller needs to take a big step back, and think about it from a totally different perspective, which is difficult to do after you've been there for 30 years. So
Yeah.
That's
Um,
all.
Last slide, and then I'll let you guys get back to your mornings. From a process perspective, this is kind of what it looks like from an attorney side to sell your clinic. And if you're looking at it, you'll notice that they look very similar. On a private sale, it's sort of this chicken egg thing. They come, they talk to Steve, and then when Steve, gets indicators that they're ready, a letter of intent's prepared that the parties negotiate the skeleton of the deal, right? And the letter of intent will be when is it closed? What's the purchase price? How long is the seller going to hang out for? And any other kind of material deals. On a private practice sale, the letter of intent might be 2 pages. They're just not, it says we agree to keep everything confidential and you're off to the races. At that point, it's 1 or 2 weeks of due diligence where the buyer's asking questions, sometimes a little bit longer. A lot of times those questions are bank driven, so things that the bank needs to do the loan. And Steve's working closely with them and on a private sale, and this is a big distinction, the seller drafts the contracts. So you would draft the first round of the agreements for both the real estate side, whether that's a lease or a lease assignment, if you have a third party landlord, and then the purchase agreements. Usually some light back and forth with those. They're not hyper complicated. It's more about, checking all the box that the buyers need for their lending and making sure that you're covered from a risk perspective. And then you're off at closing. A private practice sale could easily close in 30 to 60 days without much of a hiccup. A corporate sale is a different animal. Uh, there they do this kind of light investigation where they're looking at the clinic, asking general questions, asking to see some general financials, all under an NDA, of course. And then they present a letter of intent that's usually much longer. The letter of intent in a corporate transaction is actually, in my opinion, the most important document because of how corporates negotiate. There, they have these private equity folks that go to the board of directors to get a blessing to submit an offer. And so the letter of intent is more than just a skeleton of the deal. It's going to have almost every economic piece of the deal incorporated in it. And so if you want something specific or fancy, um, you need to put that in the letter of intent because once the board has blessed it from the corporate side, getting them to change economic things from the letter of intent is really hard. It's not like in a private sale where if something comes up, the parties can sort of just work through it. They're increasingly hesitant to change anything material from the letter of intent. So when I do a corporate deal, I get way in the weeds on the letter of intent. In the employment section, I say my client takes every August off. They do not work weekends. He gets 23% of, ACL surgery because he does it this, the old-fashioned way with a wire so that the dogs need less rehab. This doctor gets more because she does acupuncture. We get really, really granular to sort of carve out the value there because it's not that they're unwilling to have those conversations. It's that their deal people are unwilling to go back to the board and say there's been a change to the letter of an intensive process. Um, Due diligence starts. They buy these clinics the same way you would buy Boeing. There's just a ton of due diligence. They ask a million questions. They will ask for confirmation that the water is wet, and it's incredibly fatiguing. That's why it's really important to do a corporate sale with a broker, just because they've been through it. They understand the shortcuts, and frankly, they have relationships with the corporates where maybe they can get them to back off some of the requests. I've had it get as granular as how often do you buy lunch for your staff? Are you passing that on as wages to them or taking a deduction? And it's like, well, they just bought Jimmy John's twice. But that's how quick they go or how deep they go into the financials. The fourth part is honestly the hardest part for sellers with corporates, and it's something that you really need an attorney and a broker to help you manage. Is in the absence of one, I see it all the time. The corporates will just start scheduling staff meet and greets before the contracts are presented. They'll come in, they want to meet the staff, they want to meet the associates. And that's not actually because they want a smooth transition. It's because they want to ferret out if anyone's going to quit before the transaction closes. and there's really shaking the tree to see how much what the morale is of the clinic. And so you really want to push back on those meet and greets. And, oftentimes they'll want to put software on the computers so that they can see what the transactions look like. And you have to play quite a bit of defense. You don't want your office manager necessarily to see that little thing in the corner tracking her and asking, what's this? And so you really need a team around you to tell them no, because otherwise their better instincts are basically to come in early and alert the staff, which can have a chilling effect on the transition, especially if you're a multi DVM clinic. The biggest stressor that Steve and I have on these is, you get all the agreements ready and they're all ready to be signed, and then you're hoping that the associates will sign the employment agreements with the corporates, because a lot of times the corporates won't buy it unless all the associates sign on. Um, the final part is the part you think, the contracts. Whereas on a private practice sale, the contracts may be 15 or 20 pages for the purchase agreement and, a 10-page lease or 20-page lease. Nothing major. That probably sounds like a lot to some people, not to me. The contracts on a corporate transaction are hundreds of pages in total. There'll be earnouts, promissory notes, restrictive agreements, vesting schedules. Um, they're incredibly complicated, and usually the biggest pitfall I see is people hire attorneys who don't do a lot of these, and the attorneys are, majoring in the minors and minoring in the majors. And by that I mean focusing on things that they're never going to get changed and leaving on the table things that they actually could get changed. Things like certain compensation structures, flexibility in the employment agreement, um, things like that. The closings for both are usually the same. There's a call, the money exchanges hands, and the wire happens. The hope is on a private sale that you can hand the keys and over to them and have a wonderful couple weeks working back and helping them transition the clinic. And then obviously post closing on the corporate world, that's oftentimes when the anxiety really starts for my clients, because they have all these earnouts that they're trying to achieve and we're managing. And I often get brought in to sort of, check in on how that's going and how corporates are earmarking those or benchmarking those earnouts. And it's a lot more complicated because so much of your money is often tied back in with the corporate in terms of equity and earnouts. And that's not wrong. For a lot of people, it's the right decision. It's just a lot more work to manage. So, uh, thanks for everyone's time. That's really all I have, but I'm open to any questions.
Yeah, thank you, Tyler, for joining us, and thank you everybody for all your time. There's a couple folks I'm going to email, and I think we addressed the other question. So thanks again. I'll send a follow-up email to everybody, and Tyler, appreciate your time on Sunday.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you all.